Hey guys, Ariel over here at Fy Nyth. Today I wanted to give you a quick rundown of how my frost covers work in the garden. A bunch of people ask me what are those white things in my garden. They are frost covers. So here's how this works. I've got all these little hoops you've probably seen in various garden pictures. I've got 4 in each bed. What these are made out of is something called ladder mesh. This is a product made for the concrete like block laying industry, I believe, that you would, if you were laying layers of concrete blocks, you would put this between them at some point to tie them together so they don't do what your Legos might have done when you were building things growing up. You put too many where the joins are all the same, and eventually your wall of Legos falls apart. So that's what they're for, but they work really good for supports in the garden. So these are, I think they come in varying lengths. I got 8-foot lengths. And I think I had to get to a hardware store to order them for me, and they got a bundle of like 50, which is more than enough to do my whole garden and have some backups. And they should last virtually forever. So it's just these 2 kind of heavy gauge wires with these little ladders, kind of connecting them to keep them at that like 1.5-inch spacing. And then both ends are just prongs. So I stick them in the ground. Now, if you saw how many rocks were under my garden and were in it when I started, that is a little difficult. This involves a lot of frustration every spring when I put them back in. I take them out over the winter because I've always been scared, depending on how our snow load happens over the winter, that they may get crushed. Maybe I could get away with just leaving them in year-round, but I have always pulled them out and laid them flat on the ground, just kind of in a pile for the winter, and then put them back in the spring. If you don't have that much snow at your house, I don't see any reason to move them. So I just stick the ends as far into the ground as I can. Sometimes I can only get them like that far in, but I'm trying to go something like that so they'll be really stable. And that works pretty well. I can move it. I can certainly pull it up and out, but that's pretty stable. So I've got 1 at each end and then 2 kind of evenly spaced through the middle. And then this stuff is a heavy frost cloth. This, I got a huge roll. I forget how many 100 feet it was. Quite a few years ago. It's got lots of stains and stuff on it at this point. I keep wondering how many more years it'll last me before I need a new batch, but this is its 4th year now on my same batch of frost cloth. So you can see as I lift up my roll here, it's anchored there at the bottom. I just use those little landscaping, they look exactly like a staple from like an office stapler, except they're really big. And so you just poke it through the cloth and then into the ground. So that edge is anchored. It always stays in the same spot. When I need to cover my garden, I just start unrolling this like this. I tried to set this up so I could do this as a 1-person operation. And I it's easier if there's no breeze. Flip this over the hoops, and it goes like halfway over. Then I run around to the other side and pull it the rest of the way down. Now the reason this edge is staying straight is there is an 18-foot piece of PVC pipe in that edge, and I actually wrapped the cloth around it and screwed it tight. So that pipe always stays on there, and it is heavy enough, and roll it the whole way, to anchor that edge. And there was a little bit of strategy with my pinning that side. The wind usually comes from this direction, so that's really anchored, but with the pins staying in, the weight of the PVC is enough to hold this edge down. I've never had to anchor it in any other way. Sometimes the ends kind of hang up just a little bit, and you gotta uncurl them. But I can just do that, and my whole bed is covered. Now if it's gonna be really cold, I can take another pin and kind of gather the fabric together at the ends here, and it just kind of lays on the ground there. But if it was really windy or really cold, I could get another pin and tack that down tight as well. And like I said, it's getting a little bit ugly, but that's okay. This is, there's varying weights of frost cloth. This is one that's supposed to keep the things under it about 6 degrees warmer than the outside temperature. And so for me, some years that can be a real garden saver. I live in a growing zone 3, but it can, I want to do a video about what those things mean, but it can frost or snow any night of the year. So I plant mostly cool weather things that would be normally spring or fall crops in most areas. That's what I can grow in a full summer here. And still, I often need these. Now, fortunately, this spring so far, we've had a really warm spring. It stayed at like somewhere between 36 to 40 degrees at night, and that might sound chilly for you, but for here, the fact that it hasn't got down to freezing in a couple weeks in a row is very warm. And so, but I still like to have this ready all summer long. I check the forecast for the lows every single day, and anytime it looks like it's gonna be cold, I'll come out here and just flip all of my covers over the hoops. And then when the sun comes back out, oh, and I was gonna say, a little bit of light does go through these. This is not a plastic. If you stretched a clear plastic like a greenhouse is often made out of over this with the sun out like it is right now, it could pretty quickly cook all the plants under there if it wasn't well vented. And there's reasons to do plastic tunnels for some things, but that's not what I'm doing with this. This is a breathable cloth. Some sunlight does go through it, some air goes through it, and some water goes through it. If it rains really heavy, things under there would get moist if the covers were up, but they would not get nearly as wet as without the cover. And then when I want to take it off, again, my PVC pipe on this side allows me to kind of pick it up in the middle, and it, you know, it bows. You can see the breeze catching it there, but I can kind of wrap the whole thing, and I just do the same thing in reverse, wrap it up to like the middle there, walk around my bed, and grab this here and roll it back up just to be kind of tidy, and lay it along the edge of the bed, and it is all ready to go for the next time that I see a frost in the forecast. So that's a pretty inexpensive system for being able to cover my entire garden for frost. I think I've got, I think it was either like $68 or $78 for that pack of all 50 of my ladder meshes that I made into my hoops. And then the frost cloth, I'd have to look it up. I think it was a little over $100 for the big roll that made, you know, and I cut it into the lengths of my beds. And it gave me enough to do all 10 of my beds. And like I said, the ladder mesh should last me virtually forever, and the cloth will have to be replaced eventually, but so far I've gotten at least 4 years out of it, and so that works pretty well. And everything is mobile, everything can be packed up. If I move out of here, I can, you know, take all my rolls of cloth on their PVCs, and when this cloth wears out, I just pull those screws out, you know, throw this cloth away and screw on a new length of cloth. But I can take all of that with me and pack up and go somewhere else. So that works really, really well for being an easy one-man operation that's also quick. You know, if you only have to cover your stuff once in a year or something, you probably wouldn't want to go to this much trouble to set this up. But because I may need to do it so many times, this works really well, and I have this set up where I can run out here and just, you know, in 10 quick flips, I can have every single bed covered and protected. So that is my frost cloth setup, and it looks like a whole bunch of little miniature greenhouses or some kind of weird space alien tunnels or something when all my covers are on the garden beds, and I like looking at them much better without them being covered, but there are times when I could not grow anything if I couldn't cover it. So maybe that gives you some ideas if you're trying to garden in a slightly adverse growing area, or trying to push the ends of your growing season. This can be a way that works really well. And this cloth is actually how I ended up with my bed spacing to start with, because when I very first planted the garden, I just had, you know, a row of something and then a path and then a row and then a path and so on the whole way down through the garden, just because that's how we'd always done it when I was growing up. Run a little rototiller between each path and hand weed around the plants. But I needed to be able to cover things, so I was making the cover go over like 3 rows, but then I had paths in the middle, but then you couldn't walk down the paths because the hoops were in the way, and so on. So I just have turned this into beds with nice big wide paths that won't look quite so wide once all these plants are up and hanging into them, but nice big wide paths down the middle, and where I can easily just cover every single bed. And then I want to go down and show you what else I did down here at the end that's just a little different. So at this end, that's actually my last frost cover on a bed. And then this is kind of my perennial bed where my rhubarb is looking big. I actually picked rhubarb and made rhubarb bars yesterday morning with that, so it was even bigger. And things like horseradish, none of the things in this bed will really ever need covered from frost because they're all very hardy things. But I have under this end, I don't know if you can see that black mesh in the shade, it doesn't show up very well. There you go. I do have strawberries and asparagus. I'm not sure anything would eat my asparagus, but I was covering the strawberries anyway, and so I figured I'd just cover the asparagus as well. But I just zip tied this. This is the same black fencing that I've got on around the whole perimeter of the yard to keep the big critters out. But this keeps birds and stuff off of the strawberries. So I just zip tied it onto the same ladder mesh hoops. Again, you can see how those two wires run down, and then they've got these little crossbars, you know, every so many inches, and that works to make a nice cover that I just don't move all summer unless I need to, you know, pick it off to pick strawberries or something, or pull some weeds under there, and keeps all the birds and everything out of there and gives things plenty of room to grow. And there's looking back at the house across all my other beds and hoops and frost claws. And the other wire you see in there, the like little squares, that is some cattle panel trellises that are going to shortly have peas and cucumbers and squashes growing up along them. So that hopefully is helpful for some ideas for how to protect your garden from cold weather and not have to spend a fortune doing it, or a ton of time, you know, setting blocks or rocks or everything on the edge of all of your covers every time you might need to protect things. Thanks for watching, folks. If you're interested in more info on my off-grid tiny house life, check out some of my other videos here. And if you like what you're seeing, click the little picture of my house to subscribe, and then hit the little bell so YouTube actually notifies you every time there's a new video available. See y'all next time.